This is the CreaseCast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the CreaseCast, your Thursday edition of the show. I am your host, Lachlan Irvin. Of course, no Cody again today. These are the non-Cody Thursday episodes where we bring in someone more interesting than Cody to come talk about the Canucks. I'm kidding. We love Cody, and he's doing great things. He actually he just put up, if you haven't checked out his website, ahlnucksharvest.com, he actually just put up a whole table of new stats that you can go check out. I'm sure he would be plugging that if you were here. He's been doing some heavy work just to be able to get back to doing the double shows eventually again. But for today, we have a special guest co-host coming in, our first guest co-host in quite some time. I think going back to really when I was doing the show by myself. I think the last person to jump on would have been Rob Williams from Daily Hive. Today, we have joining us from a fellow writer at CanucksArmy, as well as a writer for Ranker. Please welcome Stephan Roget to the show. Hey, Stephan, how's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Honored to be the second the guest. That's really special. I just want to get ahead of this right away. You know, as much as I respect Cody for the stat keeping and all the takes and stuff, more than that, I respect him for his ruthlessness on Twitter. So he is not someone I want coming after me. So like. Your words, not mine. I just want to make that clear, Cody.
Oh, yeah.
You know, please don't come after me.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh no. Cody will just yell at. Well, will only yell at me in the DMs later. That's
okay.
You don't even have to worry about that. Yeah. Don't. No. He is an incredible Twitter guy. I wish I had his guts. I don't have the. I'm not cool enough to pull off just an absolutely like devastating Twitter own.
Yeah, the guts plus the eloquence is a lethal combination.
It's a fine line. You got to find that balance, and not everyone is capable of that. So he does it quite well.
Yeah, we could all be so lucky.
Yeah, you have, and you. I'll say this: you have the balance when it comes to just being such a well-rounded person when it comes to your writing and when it to your Canucks Army articles. I've read quite a few of them. They're very, very good. And so I was really,
thank you.
I was like, when I was trying to figure out who I wanted to get on the show, to bring in as like a co-host to kind of get on the show here, you were one of the first people that came to mind. So I was like, okay, we got to get Stephan on here. He's super nice. He's always pumping my tires on Twitter. We absolutely got to get him on. He's got great writing and great hockey opinions, as well as great Marvel opinions, I will say as well.
Well, thank you. Honestly, that last bit is so much more of a compliment than the other stuff, but that's an overwhelming introduction. Thank you very much. Geez, what do you say to all that?
Well,
I respectfully disagree, on account of the old imposter syndrome and all that stuff, but thanks. Quite a pump up on your end. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, obviously the pleasure is ours to have you here. And I will say, my first question that I did want to ask you about is specifically in regards to the fact that, I will say I feel a little bit like, I was misled slightly here, because when I look at your profile picture on Twitter, it appears to be the Thing from Fantastic Four, with a bloody nose, and and I gotta say, you look nothing like that. So where did that picture come from? What was the inspiration for that?
Well, thanks for saying that I don't look like the Thing. Again, you're another compliment to throw on the pile. I appreciate that. Long story short is I don't really update my Twitter profile picture at all. And anytime I think I've had one, it's been just a comic book panel that I enjoyed or affected me or something like that. In this case, it was from the Empire kind of crossover. And it was just like an inspiring Benjamin Grimm moment. And then I made up my Twitter profile on a random whim. And I guess I just haven't had a similar whim since then. So not the most exciting origin story, but there it is.
You might have to get to there might be a point where you have to get an artist to draw you a version for you, draw a comic book version for you. Like maybe there's a Canuck tie in there. Maybe you can do something like that where it's like you have your own version.
I do kind of like that. I'm worried it would go, along the lines of that Stan Lee Guardians project. That would be my number one worry. Like, I'm definitely a little wary of hockey themed superheroes.
Hockey themed Guardian project. By which do you mean this book? By any
Oh
chance?
my!
I have literally sitting right here,
folks. That is not planned. That
was
organic.
Wow. That was not planned at all. I will say that for anyone who listens to our Patreon show, off the post, you'll know that we went on our last episode of that, our intern / producer Jacob and I were talking about the idea of potentially taking the Guardian Project book, like typing it out like screenplay style and like doing like a table read on some of those shows. We are planning to do that. I have the first one. I have a couple in mind there that I want to do right out of the gate that are just so. I was very disappointed. Not to delay too much into talking about bad hockey, but I really wish they had done more with that. If they had stuck it out with that thing, I get that it was bad. I get that too many of those comic characters that they created were very, very well lifted from other more popular characters. But they completely missed the boat on superheroes, because that was literally 2011. That was a year before the Avengers movie came out, which is when like the superhero craze like really, really, really took off from there. Like that's when it became like the crazy, everybody's got to be there for every single movie after year kind of thing. If they had stuck it out like a year or two more, they might have been like ahead of the curve for a change on that.
Maybe if it didn't like suck so bad.
Yeah, if it didn't suck, if it wasn't so cringy.
Yeah. You've backed me into the corner of besmirching Stan Lee early on in my podcast appearance,
the late great Stan
like,
Lee,
which is like true sacrilege.
Well, but, to be fair, he clearly didn't write any of those. Like he clearly didn't write any of those characters.
Nor has he maybe ever seen a hockey game in his life. Like he's probably
he's from New York. He might have seen a Rangers game here and there. Like
that's
you never
fair.
know. You never know.
He was also at least a good 30, if not 40 years away from inventing his last impactful character. And so that's, that wasn't really his bag anymore. And
Yeah, he got
tragedy.
You know what it was? He got to the point where he's so famous. He's done everything he can creatively that you get to a point where you're like, okay, now I'm just going to start, slapping my name onto other people's stuff because it gives it, it gives it more notoriety. It gives it more like leverage, I guess, sort of thing. Yeah. And once you're famous enough, you could do that. I will say that, I'm a big Marvel guy. And again, that's part of the reason why I was excited to have you on, is because we like talking superheroes around here. We like talking about the movies and everything. So I wanted to ask you, like, specifically, like, you do a lot of writing, like specifically on Ranker, about like Marvel, everything. Clearly that's, I wouldn't say that's necessarily clearly your first love, but it is something that you clearly care about quite a bit. You're a big superhero guy. How did hockey writing kind of get in, kind of work its way in there?
It's definitely related. Like, so I tried to kind of break in more writing about that sort of stuff, like pop culture, definitely comic books, like specifically. It's obviously like, the major in my fandom degree. But so I was trying to kind of break in with that, with like Ranker and other things. And then when we're starting out, it's kind of, hard to get gigs and stuff. And you're right, an article a month or something like that. And I just want something to kind of keep my skills sharp or whatever. And so I started just like doing kind of random posts on Reddit where I was, put more effort into them than the average Reddit post, and like using that as a training ground. And then eventually someone recommended me to Ryan Beach at CanucksArmy when he was the managing editor there. And he sent me a message and asked me to write a sampler, and I did, and people liked it. And that was, the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, there you go. Friend of the show, Ryan Beach. We obviously love him around here. So you've been at CanucksArmy now for quite a bit of time now, because you've worked with quite a few different people over the years.
I've survived 3 managing editors now. So I believe I am the senior person at this point.
So you're in charge then. You're technically in charge then. Like I think that's how that works. I think that's how that works. Yeah.
But I'm pretty benevolent about it. Like I do require that Quads refers to me as his favorite writer at least once per Canucks Conversation episode. Like that's a rule.
He's just got to throw it in.
He's good about it. He's good about it. And when he misses it, does he hear about it? I mean, yeah, he does. You know, but it's a dialogue, and he respects that for sure.
For sure. I've often heard him mention that you're his favorite writer. I think I'm like closer to like second to last. Like or like probably just like at the bottom. Like, you know, I don't do anything that interesting.
Hey, come on.
I'm getting better.
I've really liked your stuff. No, you're coming in with some like some motivation, it seems like, and you know, trying to tackle some important topics. All the respect in the world to you. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I did want to come in, like I talked about I did the Bo Horvat article, I think last week. I don't know how much, I forget how much we talked about that if we had talked about it at all in the previous show. But yeah, like I wanted to come in and make, you know, I wanted to make sure that I covered like some stuff, even if it made me, you know, not necessarily uncomfortable, just in the sense of like, oh, I'm a much more, I'm not a very like, out there guy when it comes to like that sort of stuff. I'm getting better at it. I'm trying to be more like, you know, trying to work on fixing hockey culture as best I can with what little influence I have. We try to do that around here. We are going to talk about some more like touchy subjects today, because of course the NHL can't take a break from itself at any point. It's exhausting at times, for sure. But we are going to talk about some regular hockey today. We are going to talk about the Canucks. They've only played one game as of recording since then. Obviously, by the time this show gets to you, they'll probably have wrapped up their game against the Avalanche. Their first of, I believe, 2 in the next week against Colorado. First on a 3-game road trip, if unless I'm mistaken. They're going to be playing Anaheim again. They're going to be playing Vegas as well. But I think we'll just, you know what, I think we'll just get into some of the the Canucks Ducks stuff as well, because you know they were coming off that win against Dallas where they looked pretty darn good. Like there was definitely like some questions, like some holes for sure in the game. Like it wasn't a perfect win. But overall they looked pretty comfortable in that game. The power play got going. Everything it kind of seemed like everything was starting to click into place a little bit more. And then you get into the Anaheim game where it's 1-0 for the longest period of time. And to be fair to the Canucks, they looked okay. Like they looked pretty good, I think, overall. But it was not the same. Like they were very clearly like getting goalied again by John Gibson. Hence why I'm wearing the jersey today. If you're watching the video version, I'm wearing the Wild Wing reverse retro jersey that I love so much. But overall, yes, they came back to tie. They got a point out of that game. But it wasn't, I would say, in my opinion, Stefan, it wasn't a good enough effort from them.
No, I mean, definitely not. And it's kind of weird because they're struggling in a bit of a different way than folks, I think, anticipated coming into the season. Like all the questions were about the blue line. But here they are playing one of the worst teams in the NHL. I mean, on paper, I mean, other than John Gibson, they're pretty
They've won 5 in a row, but that's like, I would argue, but I think you and I would agree that that's not necessarily the full story for them.
No. And then like, you can't score on them. And you're supposed to be this like top 6 heavy team with a suspect blue line. And it just, it doesn't really make sense. Yeah. It's strange.
Very strange. I will say that like as a goalie watching that game, like I saw a lot of people talking about like, oh, you know, they're out shooting Anaheim. They're getting far more opportunities than they did in recent games. It's just the fact that they've got a hot goaltender. And I can see like where that's coming from. I mean, they had 43 shots. They had 43 shots on goal. That's good. And if you want to talk about things that bode well for the Canucks, that is good. They've long been struggling with trying to get shots on goal at all. And for them to outshoot the outshoot anybody in a game is a good start. It's a good starting point for them. The problem was, for me, I'm watching the plays. This is not based on any advanced stats. I'm sure we could look. I did not get a chance to look them up yet. But just from like what my eye test showed me, I was watching them take these shots, and I'm watching like shot from the blue line, shot from from way at the top of the circle, shot from the corner. I'm watching, I'm like, there's not a lot of actually like high danger shots getting through. They weren't getting a lot of like crazy good opportunities on John Gibson right up until the end of the game, which is when they started getting shots to go in. And I was like, I don't think John Gibson is actually playing necessarily as well as people think he is. Like, he definitely had a very good game, but I wasn't looking at it like, oh my God, he's everywhere. Like, they can't buy a goal. Like, I was looking at him like, oh, okay, you're not really getting a lot of good quality chances here. You're kind of just doing what the Canucks do far too often, which is throwing it in from the blue line and hoping it lands in front.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some advanced stats that will support that. I think it was Kevin Woodley who was pointing out that the Ducks, I think, doubled or maybe even more than doubled the like high danger chances and in that game. And so like props to Demko, right? Because he's facing a preposterous amount of dangerous shots and saving most of them. And you're probably right that Gibson's performance is maybe a little overrated. I mean, it's still pretty darn good.
Yeah. I would say Halak and Gibson, they played that game was actually a very good goalie. That was a good goalie matchup. Overall,
I said Demko. That's embarrassing.
Yeah, that's okay. Oh, you know what? The performance that Halak had was Demko-esque in terms of how he held the minute. So I see where the mistake would come in. Quite frankly, it took me a minute to even realize that was an error at all. So
You tried to cover for me, and I appreciate that, but I had to come clean there. That's
fair enough. But you know what? The goaltending battle was quite good. Again, in the later stages of the game, Gibson definitely was playing very, very, very good hockey. In the OT period in particular, the Canucks win that game had it not been for the quality of stops that John Gibson was making in that overtime session.
Yeah.
The problem is, again, to that point, they weren't really getting enough of them through. And it was a lot of just kind of like taking shots on goal, hoping something clicks, which has kind of been, which again, shots is good. We're not disparaging against the fact that shots are important and you need to get some stuff on net. Especially when you're a team like the Canucks that when it comes to your power play in particular, you've been struggling of not getting shots quick enough and not getting them often enough on those special teams options. But when it comes to just 5-on-5 hockey, you need to be getting more high danger chances, and they weren't getting them. And they weren't getting them at the end of the day. Stephan, before we get any farther into this show, there is a tradition around here that we have where we hand out the Player of the Game award, the Player of the Show award, I guess, which is the Infinity Gauntlet, which we have right here.
I see that.
We hand it out every single show to each person gets an Infinity Gauntlet to hand out to a player they're choosing.
Wow.
Since this is your first time on the show, I will give you a little bit of time to figure out who you want to give it to. And I'll go first here, and I'll say that for me personally, I mean, this is a very goalie centric show, and Cody has put a limit on how many times I'm allowed to give Thatcher Demko the Infinity Gauntlet. So I'm not going to give it to Demko because I get to give it to Halak instead. I'm giving it to Yarrow Halak. Because for so many reasons, particularly the fact of this is his third game in net for the Canucks this year. And in that time span, the Canucks have scored for him a grand total of 4 goals. They've scored 4 goals in the 3 games he's started. They've lost 2 of those games 2-1, and they lost another one 3-2 in overtime. And it sure looked like it was the fact that we'll get into the JT Miller own goal in a bit here, but the fact that JT Miller scored on his own net and then scored to make it 2-1, I was like, well, this is just shaping up to be the exact same, another 2-1 loss for poor Yarrow Halak. And of course, there's the whole tripping penalty that he got that was complete garbage. That was the worst call I've ever seen, to the point where it was like Ryan Getzlaf, notorious guy who, he sells calls quite often. He didn't even look, you look at his face, he's like, he wasn't even trying to draw anything there. And he's like, what happened? And he's like kind of laughing, like, are you really? They're calling that? Okay. Like it was a weird one.
If I can be a little bit of a devil's advocate here, and not like total, like a minor demon's advocate.
Go ahead.
There is contact briefly, and does that contribute to the like speed wobble? Maybe. So like technically by like maybe the letter of the law, that's penalty, but then you have to consider what the usual threshold is for a tripping call, and then the context of the game situation, and then it becomes a like terrible, unforgivable call. But there's like, some people are like, oh, he didn't even touch him. And I was like, well yeah. he technically did.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Halak did touch Getzlaf. He definitely he definitely took one of Getzlaf's feet out from underneath him, but Halak is expecting a shot and he's trying to make a save and he falls over in the process. Right. So it's like, it's a case of like, especially, like you mentioned, like the NHL, for all their love for game management and whatever, regardless of how bad that is, it's like, you're going to call that. You're going to call a goaltender who's trying to make a save in a 2-1 game for tripping. That's the threshold now, apparently. Although that doesn't even line up necessarily with the whole, there was the play earlier in the week, I think with, it was Carolina and Florida, where Antti Raanta comes fully charging out of his net to make a play. And I think it was Noel Acciari. I could be wrong there on the Panthers, who just decks him. And it was one of those, and he got I believe a 5 in a game for that. And then now all of a sudden they're calling Halak on just a goofy tripping penalty late in a 2-1 close game for no apparent reason. I was like, this is bull crap. Like I was more mad about that than anything I saw in the rest of the game. Yeah.
That's a reasonable reaction. Not to be pedantic, I think it was Ryan Lomberg who hit.
You're right.
Ranta,
it was Lomberg.
So
it was Lomberg. You're right.
Sorry to check you on your own podcast, but
that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, I just think too, like, what level of tripping would a defenseman have had to do in the same situation to pick up a minor there? And he would have had to like pitchfork a dude into the ice, right? And so it's like, it's definitely unfair. And you're right to be mad. Those feelings are valid.
And again, and like I said at the time with the Lomberg Raanta hit, goalies are the protagonists of hockey. They're the main characters, so they should get whatever they want. That's how it goes. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. This is just how it is. This is how hockey always is.
You will like this then. When I was a child, I had my letter published in the Hockey News. Humble brag there. Yeah,
there
and it was.
Let's hear about that.
It was a response to a letter that had been the previous issue where this guy was like, goalies wear the most equipment and they're not allowed to get hit. How does that make sense? And I was like, they're like, they're designed for a very specific purpose of stopping pucks. And it's like saying you can hit a guy wearing a bulletproof vest with a car. It's like they're designed for a very specific purpose, right? And it's definitely not getting decked.
Right.
Yeah. So like they barely wear helmets.
A man after my own heart. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that, like, I do, like, especially when that conversation came up, I did even say, like, there are the essence of the rule in terms of like how it's like how goalie interference in particular is supposed to be like called. I do think it's weird, like say in Ranta's case, for example, where he comes fully out of his net. I do think to a degree, there is a sense of like, if the player's coming after the puck, like the goaltender should be aware that there is a chance they're going to take a hit, especially like that far out of your net, like that kind of thing. Like, and especially like with guys like say like Marty Turco in the past, who was another guy that came out quite often, Martin Brodeur, like those guys. I do think that there is a sense of like, maybe those guys, there is an essence of you might be fair game at that point to a degree. but yeah, at the same time, like you can't just be like out there, like you can't. The second you give them the inch there, they take a mile and they start just decking goaltenders in the middle of the play. I was like, I think it was Daniel Wagner did an article on like weird rules that people want to see, and my suggestion was goalies should be able to be like the bludger in Quidditch, where they can just go, where they're allowed to go out and deck whoever they want. But no player can touch them. If they even like even just tap them on the shoulder to like say, hey, you dropped this. Nope, penalty, you're gone. Like goalie should be allowed to do cross the red line, go wherever they want. They're just a full rover who can do no penalties.
I cannot possibly agree with that. And as you mentioned it, I think
why not? It's so reasonable. That's such a reasonable request.
They have the privilege, and then those that use that privilege to like get away with dirty stuff are cowards, in my opinion. And of course, I'm talking about Tim Thomas. Yes, when I think about him decking Sedin, it's still like I'm honestly a little angry now.
You and all of us, everybody else. And so, all right. So now so if you were to give out an Infinity Gauntlet this week,
who
would you go for? There you go.
That was a digression. Sorry about that.
Oh no, that's again, this is what podcasts are for, is going off on weird, crazy tangents we can, because we can.
Of course. So being a comic book purist, I'm going to consider the responsibility that comes with the wielding of an Infinity Gauntlet. Like you don't want to give that to just anyone, right? Like
of course.
And so like you could consider JT Miller, but no offense, I would not personally trust JT Miller with the Infinity Gauntlet. And so I am going to hand it to Vasily Podkolzin, who I think is a good kid. You know, like he's going to use it responsibly. He's probably going to, he very much reminds me of the X-Men Colossus, right? In that he's large and Russian and soft spoken and has a incredible deep voice, very strong. The only caveat might be that his hand might not actually fit within the gauntlet. So he might have to borrow like the Tony Stark Nano one that will fit around it. But Podkolzin gets my Infinity Gauntlet.
That's a very good choice, because you know what, it comes down to like if we're talking about the full responsibility of wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, not on a hockey sense, just on a pure person standpoint. It's like it's him, it's Bo Horvat, it's Pettersson probably, and that's maybe it. Like that might be all of them. Then maybe Thatcher Demko as well, because he's just so good.
And I just want to put this out there, get ahead of it. If you got any like Krakoa heads that are watching the podcast, and are up with the recent X comics and are like, we don't, you think Colossus is trustworthy? I'm aware. Like I'm speaking generally, so get off my back. That's all I have to say there.
I have not heard from too many diehard comic book people in terms of the show. I am certainly. Okay. I don't know Cody's comic book history. I don't know if he has any in particular. I know he watches all the movies, but I don't know if he has any. I definitely have a shelf full of comics sitting right in front of me. It's mostly Deadpool.
Okay, yeah,
with a little bit of Spider-Man thrown in there as well. Yeah.
Deadpool was my entry point into comics, like into actually reading and buying monthly comics and stuff. I started with Deadpool, so he is a good like entry point, specifically because I think he's a lot like, personally, like when I started reading comic books for the first time, I was a little bit like, because it was long after the MCU movies started. I was like, I kind of expected them to be a little more on the funny side kind of thing. Like I expected more humor out of this when I started reading things like Iron Man and like Captain America, like a couple of them, and Thor. I was like, I expected more quips in here. What do you mean they're not all like Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Hemsworth? What are you talking about? But Deadpool is very much exactly what I expected with comics. So like he fit the bill very nicely, and is why probably the only comic I read quite regularly now. Yeah, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but my first comic book was definitely Cable and Deadpool, like the team up comic that ran for 50 odd issues, and I was hooked off of that, and still am deeply hooked.
There we go. I'm gonna get more into comics, I think, later on when I have disposable income. Right now I don't have it. It's not there. It's not there for comics. I also just haven't found a new comic book store since I moved yet. So I know there's one on Granville that I can go to, but that's a little far for me living in Burnaby.
Fair enough.
So I have to
That
find
is
a
a good
local
one.
place. I have to find my local place. I have to find the local place to walk to that I can go get my comic fix and whatnot, and my board game fix. I have a lot of board games. All right, let's talk about a little bit about the fact of like after the Halak tripping call, there was the puck don't lie moment that I think somebody put it on Twitter of the fact that Pettersson ties it with I think a minute remaining in that game, like not much time
Not
left
much.
in that hockey game, and especially for Pettersson had been struggling for most of this season. Like he's really been gripping the stick a little too tight. He's been bobbling a couple passes, things just like a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes for the player that Elias Pettersson is. To see him just get that late goal in particular. Yes, he had the power play goal against Dallas. That was great. I had a great view of that from where I was sitting at Rogers Arena for that game. From seeing it at home, this goal at home, that was a very vintage Pettersson shot that I think desperately he needed. And I think the team needed to see it a little bit as well.
Yeah, I especially enjoyed it because I really felt like you could feel it coming. Like he was playing well all game, and both the previous game and this one, he took a few hard hits and seemed to be getting like jostled around a little bit more than he had been, and he seemed to respond with more confident play off of that, which it makes sense. Like we know how he dominated in the playoffs. And when the physical heat got turned up on him, he always tends to respond very well. And so it's nice to see him face some on ice adversity and respond positively. And I mean, it's clear that his issues are largely, confidence based. I think to anyone watching, like they would agree with that. And so it doesn't take much to regain your confidence, and a goal like that probably goes a really long way towards it. So it was nice to see. It was cathartic, I would say.
Yeah, 2 goals in 2 games especially will do that for you. Like it's like I know some people, like there have been I think there are people that don't listen to the show, so we're just preaching to the choir here as is. But it's like, there have been some people that are like, oh, he's lazy, he's not trying as hard as he can. It's like, nope, that's not the case. He's clearly just having a bit of a tough time. It's an in your own head. It was never a case of like, oh, he might never score again. You knew it was coming. It was just gonna take the one straw to break the camel's back there a little bit. You needed to get the piano off your back. And I think the power play goal was that against Dallas was kind of like the small icebreaker, and then you get into that goal, that tying goal, where it's like, okay, he's back to where he is. Like he started playing, like even into like the overtime period, he looked a lot better with the way that he was playing, and it looks like he's picking up as he goes. Like you can clearly see the more quintessential Elias Pettersson type play kind of picking up into place there.
Yeah, it is frustrating how quickly people seem to give up on Elias Pettersson. And if there's one, I've written about this before, but if there's one fan base that should have learned about patience with Swedish superstars, it's Vancouver. Like yes. you've got the Marcus Naslund precedent, obviously, but then the Sedin precedent, which is like the ultimate precedent for just waiting it out. Like I am old enough to remember like the early forum days and stuff of the everyone wanted to trade the Sedins for Vincent Lecavalier, and like constantly that was the trade. Like everyone was so certain that we were going to flip the Sedin twins for Vincent Lecavalier,
and that just straight up, geez, that
straight
is
up 2 for 1.
Wow, that is a throwback. I didn't even know that was a suggestion at any point.
It was very popular. Yeah. And so obviously that would not have turned out fantastically.
No, definitely not. Especially like just the trajectory of where like Vinny Lecavalier was a great player, but like based on when the Canucks got good, he would have not been much help at that point. He would not have been a big help. Probably would have gone as well.
And I mean, Pettersson has already shown a lot more to this point, like in his career, than the Sedins did by far, than Marcus Naslund did by far. And so like if they had the capacity to add so much to their games as they aged, why is it assumed that Pettersson is like he has like 8 bad games, and then people are like, it sucks that he's bad forever now.
Yeah, like, they're like, why? Like they think he's peaked.
He's tainted.
Yeah.
He's had the taint of bad play.
Yeah.
And that's it.
I imagine that for some people, like the worry is just like based on not even like necessarily recent like situations. Cause frankly, most of the Canucks like big name prospects that have come through in recent years have like pretty quick have done pretty well, like right out of the gate and just kept on going for the most part. But like, I wonder if it maybe just even goes into like, the prime years of the Canucks specifically when it comes to like how the Canucks when they were at their best, when they were winning their 2 President's trophies, like that was largely due to players who are already in the system for a very long time before then, or were like players that had been, or there were players that they had signed away from other teams. Like there wasn't like Cody Hodgson wasn't a big part of the 2011, 2012 teams.
No.
He wasn't like he wasn't like a major part of that. Like and he had his moments where he looked pretty darn good, but like other than that, it just never really clicked. So I mean, maybe that's part of it for them. They're just worried that but like, it's pretty clear that Elias Pettersson is better than Cody Hodgson. So I don't know. I don't fully even I wouldn't even fully necessarily understand that. Like, again, it's a case of like, you see the writing on the wall with him where it's like, he's gonna figure it out eventually. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And thankfully for the Canucks, it seems like he's figured it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I actually have kind of a long-standing theory on this. Like, a couple of different publications have tried to do measures of which NHL franchise fan base has suffered the most, like numerical measures where you get a certain amount of points for Stanley Cup final losses and lottery losses and things like that. And it always comes down to like the Vancouver Canucks and Buffalo Sabres, and usually with the Canucks on top. And so there's definitely this like reflex where it's like a dog that's been kicked or something like that, where it's expecting, like, so many things have gone so wrong, like Cody Hodgson, like, every other thing like that in Canucks history, like 2011, where, Pettersson has 8 or 10 bad games and people go, oh, here we go again. Yeah. Here we go again. Yeah.
It's like you just got like some 65-year-old guys like, this is Dale Talon all over again. Like,
yeah, I know.
Started right at the beginning. The quote that I always use when we come into like the whole like, oh, like the tortured fan base thing, like the story of the Canucks and their history and everything, that I love, and I'm sure I've referenced it on this show before, is the John Boyes quote from his Seattle Mariners from the massive like Seattle Mariners documentary on YouTube that he did. John Boyes writes for like SB Nation. He does videos for like secret bases, I think, their YouTube channel now. The phrase that he used specifically to describe the Mariners that I think applies to the Canucks really well, and I've kind of already used it a little bit earlier in the show actually, was that he said the Mariners aren't competitors, they're protagonists, and that baseball is just kind of happening to them. I feel like the Canucks are very much in that same kind of category where they're not, hockey just kind of is happening to the Canucks. They're not really like, they're characters in a big story about hockey that just happens to be evolving around them, and the weirdest like storylines happen to them. And I think it's a very, very apt description of where we're at with the Canucks. There's a lot of similarities there.
I really enjoy that. That's beautiful, honestly. That's and being I think I'm a natural optimist, and being an optimist, I would say then that it's like, you can have these long suffering storylines that are only serving to make the payoff that much sweeter in the end. And so I have always said, like, the trade-off of being the longest suffering and most suffering franchise is if and when, the Canucks ultimately win a championship, like nothing will feel better. So there is a trade-off, right? If you want to be optimistic, then one day, if it happens, that's a day to remember right there.
Right. Like, obviously, if you ask anybody like today, like, would you trade like a bunch of years for losing for a Stanley Cup, say like 10 years ago? They'd be like, yeah, I want the cup as soon as possible. But at the same time, yeah, you're right. Like, it is that sense of like the farther in, again, sports are just fun. They're just reality TV at the end of the day. So it's like, at the end of the day, if you get the payoff you want with this team eventually, and you see the glimpses of it here and there, especially with especially with this team. Like you see the pieces there that could make that could be there for that for that big moment. It's just going to make it all the more exciting when it does happen, and you hope.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're impatient people. We've got impatient. We're ticking time bomb, so it's like, hey, can you get it done now so I don't have to wait anymore?
Yeah, I mean, like, even though I'm a natural optimist, I'm obviously pessimistic at times too. And there are definitely times when I think about like, okay, this is going to be dark. I don't know if this is too dark for the podcast, but I've definitely had thoughts of like, you're 60 or 80 years from now, depending on how fortunate I am, on the deathbed. And then Canucks have like, recently been eliminated from the playoffs or something like that. And just thinking like, oh, damn, not even one. Like, geez,
oh God,
really?
like
100 years of supporting the Canucks, and I don't get one. Like, oh man. So sorry if that's too dark.
I think that's where we would go I think that's frankly very much where we would go in the show at times, like especially when Cody's here. Like Cody and I would definitely go down that route. So yeah. I'm 23 I'm 23 God, how old am I now? I don't even remember at this point.
So
the pandemic has really taken a chopping block to where I am. I'm 24 now. Oh God.
Okay.
I'm 24.
Happy birthday if that's recent.
Happy birthday. It was June. It's been a while. The years have just blended together. I'm 24, and sometimes I just think about like, God, they're not going to do it. Well, they're not going to win once in my life, are they? I'm like I'm a quarter of the way through, and I'm not expecting much from them at this point. I'm going to hang on, I hope, but we'll see.
I was about your age. How old was I? No, I was about 20. How was I? I was 22 for 2011. And so I definitely remember that that crash of like going, I was there physically for game 7. Not in the building
or like at downtown.
And again, just to get ahead of it, no rioting was done by me. Want to say that. I was actually quite upset about the rioting.
In case the courts are listening. No.
Yeah, what is the statute of limitations? So like I remember going down and like, oh, it's quite a drive from up here down to there and stuff, and going down and having like a Canucks playlist and stuff and listening to Where the Streets Have No Names, like on repeat
for 12 hours.
Yeah, and and just being so pumped and being like, this is it. This is like and I always try to practice presence and stuff and being like, you're here, this is when it happens, like live this. And then one goal goes in and you're like, okay, it's just setting up the comeback story, and then it's 2. And then it's 3, and then it's 4. It's like brutal. And then like I always remember like it happened, they lost, and I'm super like disappointed. And then there's this the Bruins are lifting the cup, and this old man stands up in front of me on the street, and he claps for the Bruins. Like he's got an old Canucks jersey on. He's clearly like waited for this longer than me, but he claps for the Bruins, and I'm like, yeah, look at this guy. He's going to be classy. And then from behind me, I immediately hear this chant kind of rising over of Thomas sucks. Thomas sucks, as he's literally lifting the Conn Smythe, right? It's like a pretty clear testament that I don't suck in this exact moment, right? And they're burning a pile of teddy bears, which they just had, I guess, on hand. And then it's like, oh,
that's funny. I do think that's kind of funny. Like, that's a funny, like, if that was the worst thing to come out of that day, like, that's honestly pretty funny. It got a lot worse from there.
As soon as I saw that, though, I'm like, oh, no, it's gonna be one of those. And,
and then,
it was one of
right,
those.
Everybody to the cars, please. We're gonna get out of town as fast as we can.
Yeah.
That was how it goes. I do it is peak this show for us to go from, talking about one loss to Anaheim in the middle of November and being like, 2011 though. Like, I mean, like that's just, if that's not the CreaseCast, I don't know what is.
Even worse than that, it's like, hey,
that's not Canucks fandom.
Yeah, Elias Pettersson is bouncing back to like, you ever think about dying one day? It's like, you ever contemplate your own mortality? Sorry about that.
Oh my God, that should just be the slogan for this show. It's just, Elias Pettersson is getting back to normal, but God, we're gonna die someday, aren't we?
What about climate change?
Man. What about climate change? What about politics? Like, just go off on that tangent. Getting to something, I guess, a much less, arguably more sad than 2011 is the status of the Canucks penalty kill, because oh my God, it's terrible. It is honestly like it honestly befuddles the mind at times, just for me, like how unbelievably bad it is. Like, to the point, like, I don't think there's ever been, like, the Canucks have been bad for sure. Like, they've had their bad moments, especially in the Jim Banning era. They've been terrible at times, in regardless of, there were times where Jason Megna and Michael Chaput were all you had. And yet I have never watched a power play, like a penalty kill, where I'm watching them, where the second the penalty gets called, I'm like, all right, goal's going in. We're going to have to start from scratch here. And God, I forget who it was. It might have just been, was it just Cody that I think on the last show, we were talking about the idea of like, what if the Canucks just like started purposely throwing the puck in their net, like in a way, like declining the penalty, just throwing it in the second the penalty gets called, just so they can get back to 5-on-5. Like, would that fix it? I forget I forget who said that, but like, oh my, I was like thinking like, that is it's bad that we're at that point and even considering that, but right now I might have to hear you out on it because it's not good. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up was because you wrote an article today for Canucks Army talking about the penalty kill and the issues surrounding it. So I guess just kind of go over what are you seeing from this PK right now? What you feel either is they're just doomed to exist in this reality, or are there ways that they can get around in fixing this?
I mean, you certainly hope so. Thank you I was going to bring up my own article and then you did it for me, which is way less awkward. So I appreciate that.
There you go.
Yeah, it's, they did bring in some quality penalty killers, to the mix. Like if you look folks like, Ekman Larsson and Dickinson and Coleman were all quite quality penalty killers on their other teams last year. And then the kind of point of my article is, you look at their stats last year and their stats as soon as they come to Vancouver, and it's preposterous how different it is. And there are other factors like, your quality of teammates and gelling together with new teammates and stuff like that. But that doesn't account for Ekman Larsson letting in 3 times as many goals per minute on the shorthanded than he did when he was in Arizona. Or Tucker Pullman, I think it's literally 4 times as many. He is bleeding power play goals against at 4 times the rate. A lot of them have already let in more power play goals against than they did all of last season. So in 5 times as many games, they're already letting in more. It's really bad. As to what to do to fix it, so much of it appears to be systems based and coaching based. And I think if you're not going to make a change in the coaching staff mid-season, maybe the answer is to bring in someone. The Canucks have added assistant coaches to the mix before. And it was kind of one in, one out with Brown and Shaw. So maybe the answer is to bring in someone. Some people have suggested the Sedins. I'd rather if they're going to do management, just focus on one thing at a time. But maybe you bring in a special team specialist or even just a penalty kill specialist.
Yeah, I do think it's also like you mentioned. Yeah, you talked about the whole fact of everybody's power play numbers are worse than usual. Particularly in Oliver Ekman-Larsson's case, that's really interesting because of the fact of, we've talked on this show plenty about how the Canucks defense objectively is not good, But if you look at each of the individual efforts, most of them are actually doing pretty okay by the standards that we expect from them. In particular, we brought up JFresh at JFresh Hockey, his charts where he was talking about how in literally every single category except the penalty kill, all of Rickman Larson's numbers are better than expected. Like he's actually doing much better than most advanced analytics models anticipate him being. The penalty kill is the only one where it's dropped out, where it completely bottomed out, and yeah, like it's interesting to see just how many things have just gone wrong to the point where it's like it's just a whole muddled mess. And, eventually Tyler Mott is going to get healthy. I believe he's on this road trip right now with the team, which is great because he's one of their best penalty killers when he's healthy. And obviously there's no ETA on Brandon Sutter coming back. So, and frankly, I've just kind of written him off for the year at this point until I hear otherwise. Unfortunately, in Sutter's case. But yeah, the Canucks are in a spot where I'm looking at them and I'm kind of just like, is there they might have to go out and honestly might have to start shopping around for players who are good on the penalty kill to bring in as well. Like I'm looking at the group that they have, and the one thing that I see that might be a fixable on ice, personnel wise case, is that they're not fast. They're not a fast PK. They stand still. They kind of just sit there and in a box, like pylons, and hope something doesn't go in. And you're seeing from a couple guys that have come in, like Juho Lammikko and Justin Bailey, to a degree, what they're doing pretty well, again, for what they're capable of, is chasing the puck carrier on the power play and actually being like, okay, we're going to force you to try to make a bad pass. We're going to force you to try and throw a quick shot at the net that you didn't want to expect, which is, I think, part of the reason why they've been so bad on the PK is the fact that they don't have anybody generally who can do that. They just all sit there and just kind of hope and just kind of sit and hope. Especially because when you see what other teams are able to do against the Canucks power play, which also hasn't been very good, it's a case of you're seeing them stand still while the other team starts moving around them and starts trying to disrupt the play, and it starts going wrong. And that's when it starts to fall apart. So I just wonder about the idea of how hard would it be for them to go out there and try and pick somebody up who could maybe bring in a little bit more speed, a little bit more of that intensity on that PK, or somebody who might already be here, like Vasily Podkolzin. We mentioned him already in the show.
I do really like the idea of Podkolzin killing penalties. I think he should do it more. I also like the idea of Höglander killing more penalties.
Yes, very true.
5-on-5, he's their best defensive forward right now. So why not give him a shot?
Connor Garland as well. Very intense on the puck carrier. He does not let up very easily. So he would be a good fit there as well.
Yeah, so much of it is puck possession and retaining. One of the best penalty killers in the NHL. I get heresy to bring his name up here, but it is Brad Marchand, and it is largely he regs the puck. He holds on to it. He doesn't let it go. Connor Garland's very similar. Podkolzin is he's got the size to do that. Höglander is one of the best possession players on the team. I think they could all do it. I do like kind of what I'm seeing from Bailey on the penalty kill. He's got some great skills, and he's like a disruptor. But he's also definitely a little lost out there, and it's pretty clear he hasn't done a ton of that in his life.
Yeah, so he's patching a hole right now, but eventually you have to fix it permanent. You have to properly fix it. He'll do fine in a pinch, but you don't want him there 82 games a year.
No, and I think the obvious, if there's a super obvious fix, I tweeted it out earlier today. I don't know if you saw, but Blake Como is on waivers today. He's over the last 3 years or so, he's been the Stars' top penalty killing forward. His role has kind of diminished a little bit this year. He's cheap. He's $1 million expiring contract. He was actually Jason Dickinson's longtime penalty killing partner in Dallas. So there's a little bit of chemistry there. And Dickinson has not been good on the penalty kill as of right now. And he was a lot better in Dallas. So that's a freebie that's right there. They're already on an American road swing, right? So Como could probably hop on a
Lay
2-hour flight and join them. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Colorado and Dallas aren't that far away. So you could probably get them there pretty quick. Yeah. And I know, like, some people have been talking about also like the idea of like, I definitely saw some people who are like, why isn't like even like Pettersson killing penalties? And I will say, like, there were a couple players that people were throwing out there where I was like, okay, that sounds too much like the whole John Tortorella wants the Sedins to block shots thing. And I don't love that, especially because the Canucks are a team that really the Travis Green Canucks are very much a team that loves the shot block. And they like to like to utilize that as much as they possibly can, and the PK. I don't think the PK does that very much these days, at least. But in those particular cases, I'm like, okay, maybe don't put Pettersson out there. Like, if you want to put out some like star guys, like, or some like bigger name guys, like, you go for Bo Horvat. He's pretty defensively responsible. Go for again, put Colson, Höglander, Garland, like those types of guys. But don't put your best scorer out there and in the case that he might try and drop down to block something, because that's asking for trouble.
There's definitely that angle to it. Like, I'm not totally against it though. Pettersson has some pretty strong defensive instincts. He picks up passes pretty well. Like, he has an active stick. He has a decent amount of takeaways. I don't think it's the worst idea, but there are better uses of his talents. You're totally right on that.
Yeah, you save them for what else you got going on as well. Yeah, they're overall, I think, I will say, like, the power play got better. Like, they're looking much more comfortable in the last two games than they have in recent memory. I don't think they had a power play goal in that last game at all, unless I'm missing something in there. I don't believe they had one. There was the one at like 5v5. They had the only goal they had was technically shorthanded. But of course,
yes.
Halak was on the bench with an empty net, so technically, I think it was 5-on-5.
That is correct.
But yeah, they looked more comfortable. The PK has a lot of work to go. And yeah, it's a case of, like, especially in the Canucks standpoint, where they're at with everybody, really, where everybody is kind of floundering for the most part. Like, they've looked a lot better in the last two particular games overall, but it's a case of, like, why not just try something? Like, you're at the point in the season where it's like, you should just throw it at the wall, throw stuff at the wall and hope it sticks and see what you get. Because sometimes they seem very adamant about, we're not going to get out of this system we have, and we're going to jam the square peg in the round hole until it fits, kind of thing.
At a certain point, you wonder if they're, like, committed though to it. You know, like, Travis Green has obviously come with this message, and it requires some buy-in, and he's in, you know, he's definitely on the hot seat if his position isn't, like, downright tentative at this point. And so you wonder if, like, you've got to keep pushing for that buy-in, right? Like, if what's going to save his job is the players, you know, either performing well under his system, or if there needs to be additional buy-in to that system, like, that might be what he has to keep pushing for realistically, like, just from a personal and practical standpoint.
Yeah, I saw some people talking about the fact that the Canucks came back and tied that game might have saved Travis Green's job, like, to an extent, because they were coming into it like they're down 2-0 up until what, like, I guess 7 minutes left in the game. They're down 2-0. It's looking like another game where they just get walked over by a team that's definitely not as good as them on paper. Like, they have some good pieces, like Troy Terry's been on an absolute tear.
Yeah.
Jamie Drysdale. They have lots of big names. Obviously, John Gibson goes without saying. But they're not as good a team on paper, and they shouldn't be, because they're in the middle of a rebuilding process. And in fact, and we're going to talk about it later, the fact that their GM just resigned. They're a team in flux, very much so. So if you're Vancouver, a team, again, like we've said many times on the show, like up to as recently as last show, whether or not, like, I being you and me, Stephan, believe that they're a playoff team, the Canucks believe they are. And if that's the case, that where you're at, you're not doing well enough. The fact that they went 2-4-1 on their homestand here is 100% not good enough. Like, they need to be so much better.
Yeah, well, and it's even, like, costly. You're an almost, I think, what is it, a sixth of the way through the season at this point. Now they're going to have to go on a couple of heaters to make up for this if they even want to be in the playoff conversation. And so it's it has been costly. I'm still skeptical that there would be a midseason coaching change at this point. I mean, especially after investing in a new 2-year contract, that could be a little dicey for a owner in a post-pandemic or still pandemic world. So I'm a little skeptical. I think they would go the trade option first, to be perfectly honest. But
Yeah, I mean, and I've said on this show before that I think if you're firing, that I think if you're looking at Travis Green as the guy who needs to go in this particular case, and not the guy the general manager who's been here for 8 years and this is the best team he could come up with, like, you're missing the point. Like, you're not really seeing the full picture. You're only seeing, like, yeah, Travis Green, I would say this so far this season, his coaching has not been the best. Like, it hasn't been great, but I'm also of the mindset of, like, if you're going to decide Travis Green's job, that should be the responsibility of the next general manager and not the current one.
Yeah, not many GMs get to fire a third coach, right? Like, that's just generally not how he'd be hiring his fourth coach. That's Brad Treliving only territory. Yeah, it's not great. It's not a great precedent. So, but I mean, the Canucks are already well into, like, how long a GM can go with this bad of a tenure and how long a coach can go with this sort of record. So, I mean, we're in it now. So,
yep. Yeah, it's where do you see, like, the Canucks are going into this 4-game road trip. They're going to play, 3 games, I should say. They're going to play in Colorado tonight, who just came out earlier, I believe today or yesterday, that Nathan MacKinnon is out for 3 weeks with an injury. So they don't have him. They don't have him for 2 games the Canucks are going to play against Colorado in the next week, which is huge for the Canucks, bad for the Avalanche, really, really bad for Colorado, who I don't believe has not been very good to start the year. They've had a bit of a struggle. Like, they've been they're 6th right now in their division. They have 9 points. They're 4-5-1. They're not for all the Canucks not being confident. The Canucks have 3 more points than Colorado right now in, I believe, just 3 more games. So it's like, yeah, you're coming in against a pretty weak team. You're going to get Vegas later in the week, who I believe has half their team injured right now.
Yeah.
They're missing absolutely everybody, and they're playing. Yeah, they're the Henderson Silver Knights right now. And then you get Anaheim again, who, again, not as good as probably as their recent record would indicate. So I guess my question to you is, like, how good of a road trip did the Canucks need to have here? Do they to keep the Wolves away from the door? I guess do they have to win all 3, or is it a case of just winning 2 out of the 3? Because
I mean, winning all 3 might be, like, it's not a do or die situation quite yet, but that would help a lot, because otherwise you're talking 2-1, you're 1 game above 500. That's not doing much for their situation right now. I think I don't know, Colorado is, you worry about these strong teams that are performing or underperforming. The Canucks, again, to go back to your protagonist theory, they seem to have a habit of being the tonic for those teams. Like, just play against the Canucks and you're going to come out of your slump.
Jack Johnson hat trick incoming.
Yeah, that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I actually had not heard the news about MacKinnon before you told me. So thanks for letting me know. That's
there you go.
Good news for the Canucks. Devastating news for my keeper team. So that's
oh no, I'm so sorry.
That's tough. He is my first overall pick. So
that's tough. Yeah, he's it's been a tough. Nathan MacKinnon has had a tough start to the year. I think he was out partially with COVID on COVID protocol for a while. I think he had another injury earlier as well, possibly, that just kept him out of, like, the first game or something, or that might have been the COVID thing.
That was the COVID. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. So yeah, he hasn't played much, and now he's hurt. And Colorado has, in a way, the horses to keep up, but at the same time, like I've said a couple times before, that I don't think the Avalanche are very strong, are not nearly as strong as they were last year, particularly in goal, because they have Darcy Kemper, who's very, very good, and I would say an underrated goalie in the NHL level, but he's injury prone, very, very injury prone, as is Pavel Francouz. They don't have a lot of, like, security there. and I worry about that for them. But yeah, the Avalanche also, for all of that, they also have Cale Makar. They have Bowen Byram, former Vancouver Giant. They have a whole list of talent. They have Gabe Landeskog. The list goes on. They're a very good hockey team when they're playing at their best. They're not as strong, but right now they're struggling. And if you're the Vancouver, you need to capitalize on it now.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Jay Fresh, who you mentioned a little bit ago, there was a chart that he put out either today or yesterday that was the top chance or expected goal suppressing pairings in the NHL, and Makar and Byram were at the top of the list. So if the Canucks can't, score a goal against Anaheim, what are they going to do against like the top shutdown pairing in the NHL? That's tough. Now, to be fair, OEL and Myers were on the same list. They were in the top 10.
They've been weirdly good. They've been really good at that, which again, like as I've talked about so many times, it's if they were making a lot less money, you would be so happy. Like it'd be like, yep, this is perfectly good. You're doing great. Like it's literally just those contracts of why it's hard to be like, oh, this is awesome that they're doing so.
If Myers is making like $3.5 million, he would be one of the most popular players on the team. Like,
easily,
like hands down, yeah.
And then you throw the Duncan Keith hit in there, and you just have a statue. Like it's that's all he needs. That's all it would be for him.
Yeah.
I
would support the statue. I don't know if I think you would have to have Tyler in the statue, and then also a like prone and bleeding Keith. Like you couldn't just have Myers. It would have to be an ensemble piece. But
it'd be like that. It'd be like that Simpsons bit where it's like the itchy and scratchy billboard where like it just moved like for like the movie or whatever, and it just squirts like fake blood, splashes like fake blood on passing cars. Like it's just one of the.
Yeah, I do really like that, getting them up on the aqueduct there, or the viaduct.
There you go. Oh, there you go. That aqueduct, I guess, is probably I keep hearing isn't going to be there for much longer. So like throw something up there while you can. Or I mean, they've been saying that for like 20 years, so it's like eventually I'm sure they'll do it. I don't know.
I'm not up on my Vancouver infrastructural rumors. Sorry.
Oh, this is well. Let's devote 40 minutes to that. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
But yeah, the Canucks are at a point here where I think I will say this, that I think if they walk out of this short road trip, if they walk out of it with one win or 2 wins out of a possible 3, I can see a situation where that's good enough. Particularly that comes based on how well did they actually play? Were they able to were the things that have not been plaguing them for the last little while, were they able to shut that stuff down and they just lost in a tight game? If they can fix like that sort of stuff and win 2 out of 3, like I'm happy. I think when you get literally right into that situation of, well, you only own 1, or let's say just to be optimistic here, like, or just to say like for interest's sake, let's say they win 1 and they lose another. They win 1 game, they lose another in OT. They go 1-1-1. So they get 3 points out of a possible 6. I would say still, even in that case, like that's not good enough. Like you still have to get the points on the board, especially right now with teams like Vegas who are so injured that you got to build up a cushion while you got the time if you believe you're a playoff team. And it doesn't feel like they have that in them right now, and I'd love to see them prove me wrong on that.
I think you're absolutely right. Like you can't go 500 because you're already below 500, and you're going to have to get your record up to at least 600 to even be sniffing the playoffs, I think. And so it's going to be tough. We'll see. It's definitely too early, like I said, for a make or break. But yeah, if they go 1-1-1, it just puts them further behind the 8 ball. Like the math is just not good for them.
Yeah, it's just you're just spinning your wheels. You're not adding anything. You're not going any farther down. You're just kind of sitting there.
I do worry about what you say though about it being good enough, because like good being the enemy of great and all that. The Canucks might just limp along to a season good enough. The trade deadline comes, they're 8 points out or whatever, so they don't sell, and then they limp through March and they don't make the playoffs, and like nobody wants to see that again.
Yeah, the worst place you can finish in the National Hockey League is 9th place in a conference. That's the worst place you can finish.
I could see that happening this year. And then it's
yeah.
like, well, they came close, so we're not going to get rid of the coach. We're not going to get rid of the GM. Like, oh, actually, the worst of all is come trade deadline, they're close, they're out of it, but they don't sell off, because they're still optimistic. And then
they win a bunch at the end.
Yeah, they go on a little heater post elimination to ruin, and I'm basically describing last year.
You're describing every year they've ever had.
Yeah, they ruin their draft position. They don't fire the coach or GM. They just bring it all back next year to try it again. Like, that's frighteningly realistic.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is just the reality. That you're basically just describing what I think life is at this point. Like, God, it's too real. It's too real. That's sadder than any of the mortality things we talked about. It's like it's the sitting and nothing changing. It's just the existential, just like you're just there. You're just existing. You're drifting through space, and doing nothing.
Like I started out sitting next to like a sun-filled window for this
and
podcast, it's gotten dark. Yeah, it's got shadowy. It's gotten cold. It's exactly. It's just affecting my mood.
Molded by the darkness. It's that feels like the tone of the show, unfortunately, in some cases. As I say that, we're going to get into a little bit of more important stuff even just now, like moving away from the Canucks standpoint of things. We did need to talk about a couple things. One, I'm going to touch on very briefly because it's one of those things where it needs a little bit more time to talk about, and we need a little bit more time to talk about. And it's a conversation I think we'll have probably on the next show as well. But there was Rick Westhead's interview with John Doe 2 that came out earlier this week, or with John Doe 2's mom, I should say.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
And which I believe is the teenager that Brad Aldrich came into sexually assaulted back in 2013, 14. And there was that interview. It was another just heart-wrenching, very hard listen. I encourage you to go listen to it if you haven't. It's just and the thing that I think bothered me most about what was discussed, like in the aftermath and everything, was the fact that the NHL refused to pay for any sort of therapy or any sort of help for this John Doe, because they're like, well, he's not an NHL player, like blah blah blah. Even though hockey's supposed to be this, like, they like to tout that hockey's a family, hockey's a big happy family. So why aren't you helping people out, even if they're not NHL players? And they basically were like, this is the Blackhawks' responsibility. Go talk to them, kind of thing. And it's just trash. It's just absolute trash. And it's like, oh, great. The franchise that didn't do anything for 10 years, they're suddenly going to be really quick. I'm sure they'll be very quick and fast on this for sure. I know it's a hard topic to discuss here, Stephan, on your first ever appearance here, but I guess just what are your thoughts on this kind of situation and everything going on?
Oh, I have a lot. It's disgusting, right? I mean, there's a lot of complicity to go around here. It doesn't have to be isolated to just the Blackhawks when this is the natural consequence of covering up a case of sexual assault, in that the perpetrator goes on to do it again because there aren't consequences. And in this case, it's even significantly worse in that they provided this criminal, this assaulter, with a letter of recommendation that put him in the position to assault a teenager. And so I think my probably worst thought about this is that it seems like a very easy PR move, to be totally cynical about it, for the NHL to provide counseling money here. And then you get into this, it's kind of like with auto companies, car companies, who they become aware of a dangerous flaw in a vehicle, and they have to consider, they do the math of, well, if we recall the cars, it costs us this amount. If we don't, it causes X amount of deaths, and then we have to pay out a certain amount of wrongful deaths. So it's actually better for us to not recall these things and just pay out the wrong. There's all this gross corporate math, and it feels kind of like the NHL is doing that with this, in that this seems like an easy win. Just give the family the money. You've had such a brutal
softball.
Yeah,
like
slam
just
dunk.
lobbed over the plate, like easiest thing in the world, lowest bar to clear, and they fall over it, they trip right over it because they don't care.
Well, and it's the not caring too, but it's also, I think, like to be darker with it, the possibility that setting a precedent for this, they're aware of how many like skeletons there are in the closet and how many similar payments they might have to make in the future, and they're doing that awful corporate math of it's not worth the PR win to set a precedent where we have to pay for this sort of stuff because as much as we say we're not, we're totally aware that this sport is rife with abuse.
Yeah, you said it. And I mean, we're seeing the ramifications already coming out right now because yesterday before the game, or technically 2 days before a day before the Canucks played Anaheim, it came out that the Ducks reported that Bob Murray, their general manager, was being put on administrative leave during an investigation into misconduct that apparently was employees of the Ducks were implored to make the call essentially and to report it based on everything that happened with the Blackhawks. Mm-hmm. And essentially it came out yesterday before the game that the Ducks owners had fired Bob Murray, and he's no longer the GM of the Ducks. They have an interim general manager right now. And I don't believe there's a whole lot of there aren't a whole lot of say stories that have come out yet necessarily in regards to what particular situations have come up, but it seems like this is one of those cases where it's far reaching. It's more than just an isolated incident situation, or as much as it is just a overarching, as some people put it, a culture of fear. This is there's a quote from actually from Daily Faceoff from, I believe, Frank Saravelli's article, basically saying, the quote is, multiple league and team sources tell Daily Faceoff that Murray is under investigation for allegations of creating a toxic workplace environment by way of his repeated verbal abuse and harassment of Ducks players, coaches, and personnel, plus his intimidation tactics and temper tantrums that fostered a culture of fear throughout the organization. Yeah, it's a case of like he was just straight up being abusive to not just to everybody basically in the organization below him, and it's it's good that it's being brought out to light now. Like it's better late. The best time to do something is always now rather than later. It's always better to deal with it when it comes up. But the fact that this went on for so long, and that I believe it was Greg Wyshynski tweeting out, like, media people didn't at least general media people didn't seem to know this was a big reoccurring issue necessarily, but apparently a lot of league people did, and they knew this was a thing.
Yeah, I think it's telling that there's not a lot of people coming out to his defense. Like, I mean, you even had idiots or cowards is probably the better word, like Jonathan Toews leaping out to the defense of Stan Bowman, for Pete's sake. But there's not a lot of people coming to, no one's saying, "Oh, I'm shocked to hear this. I worked with him for years, and he was great." It's
but he was so nice to me.
Yeah. You're not getting. So it's very clear that someone was putting a clip around today of Don Cherry talking about how much he liked the guy, and that might be the kiss.
Oh, there you go.
on Don Cherry firing day, but it's. I think it says a lot about hockey culture that this person rises to the tip top of the position, managerially speaking, and stays there for a really long time. And maybe it sounds as though maybe this is an issue. And we have to be careful. We don't know all the details.
It's all alleged right now, in theory.
Yeah. I believe he was given the option of resigning too, I think. So that's maybe a little different than a firing. And
right. He did resign.
And alcohol abuse has been cited as a factor here, and he's entered into a rehabilitation program, right? So you want to be respectful of that and
Very
not
true.
speculate there. That's important to me. But it says a lot that, as soon as something like this, a hotline becomes available, you've got people, there's an awareness now that something can be done about this. And for a really long time, folks like this have been able to not just succeed in the sport, but thrive in the sport, where it's actually beneficial sometimes to be abusive, right? And the control that it gives you over people. And it's funny because like the common refrain when people are trying to shut down conversations about this is always like the cliche is like, oh, you didn't even play the sport, or how many times have you even played, and da da da. And I think anyone that I know who played for any significant portion of their life, even just being minor hockey, has experienced a coach or a manager or some adult in the sport who is if not capital A abusive, right? Berating or unfair in their control and things like that. And it's not a surprise to anyone, with inside knowledge of hockey, that this sort of thing is common and that it happens, and that there are managers who have a reputation of being like way more than hard asses, but where they're like, like you said, a culture of fear. They're figures to be feared. And that's, it says a lot about the sport, and none of it is good.
Yeah. You said it. I mean, from, not to make this about me or anything, of course, but like, from personal experience, like I've had a coach once before that when I was in, I was developing goalie, just didn't play me, played me one game all season, in a league where who cares if winning is a thing, right? Like, it's minor hockey at the Pee Wee level. It's not AAA or AA. It's literally just it's literally just travel hockey. It's not nobody's going to the NHL from that group here. So for you to only play a goalie once just because he wasn't very good, like, is unacceptable. And I just think back to that, like, geez, I worked so hard.
Yeah.
I worked so hard to that year, to the point where the other goaltender started not showing up to practice ever. But to the point, like, I think he went months between showing up for a practice just because he didn't feel like it. And they kept starting him anyway because he was better. And it was like, it's like, what's the point here? You're just trying to get it's like, as if you're the coach in that case, it's like, God, you're just trying to make yourself look very, very good as like this great coach. Like, it was, and that's very small potatoes compared to what we're dealing with here. But like, you see you see where that culture comes from and how it starts right from the bottom. Like, it seeps all the way down into like the tentacles just reach everywhere. And I'm sure we're gonna see a lot of more cases like this. We're gonna see hockey. I think we're gonna see I would be shocked if Bob Murray is the last guy to get fired or axed from an NHL job this season, because of something coming out. Because again, I think if there's one good thing that's coming out of all this, it's people are feeling more comfortable talking about that stuff and making that stuff publicly known. Yeah. And hockey needs that now more than ever. They need people to feel safe being able to bring these sorts of conversations to light and being able to bring these sorts of like situations into the public eye, and not fearing that it's going to get drowned out, or that they're going to be called a liar or what have you. And that's important.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it is the culture of fear, and it starts so young. You're taught not to like talk back to your coach, and when you're very young, and that there will be repercussions if you do. And it's so insidious, and it's so deeply ingrained that you get millionaire superstar Anaheim Ducks players that feel that they can't speak out when they're being like relentlessly verbally abused by their manager or their coach. Yeah. And that's just bizarre. But then it takes brave people like Kyle Beach and like others because you're always told, like, if you speak out about this, you're going to be labeled as a locker room cancer, and your career is going to be ruined. Like, and then for someone like Kyle Beach to be threatened in even significantly worse ways than that, in horrific ways, and still speak out, and then be, received so well and celebrated. Right. And the public is not going to turn on Kyle Beach when he speaks out. The public is going to support him because, of course we are. And that's only going to empower more folks to speak out. And we are at the like precipice of something huge here, like a huge shift. I truly believe it. And it's a painful shift, but it is a necessary one, and one for the positive. It's like sorry, I feel like I'm rambling here, but when we entered the era in which we became aware of the impact of head injuries in hockey, and brain injuries and long-term brain injuries, well, we saw a lot more concussions, or so we thought, right? Like it seemed like we're talking about concussions all the time, and they just happen every year. And back in the day, they didn't seem to, but they did. Like this stuff has been happening all along. Your more awareness brings, more talking about it, and that sucks. And sometimes, and it can be exhausting. But it's necessary, and it's part of making the sport better. And just like this, it's something that's been happening for as long as the sport has existed. And it's only now being talked about, right? And that brings awareness. And it seems like, holy crap, all this stuff is happening at once, but it's not happening all at once. It's been happening all along. It's just it's being dragged into the spotlight.
Yeah, like it's public what's been happening with Bob Murray now, but he's been in charge of the Ducks since he had been in charge of the Ducks since 2008. So it had been going on for over a decade, for 12 years or 13 years. So it's like it's a case of where it's finally come to roost, and it's good that it's happening. And again, you hope that more people get in power who are going to change things and help foster a much better, friendlier culture for everybody. I'm very interested. I'll say I'm interested from like a Canucks standpoint, like interested in hearing if Kevin Bieksa, who's on Hockey Night in Canada every week, says anything about it and what's going on there. If he provides any sort of input there. Ryan Kessler is obviously a guy who went through that Ducks locker room for a very long time. I'd be interested to know what he saw and what he witnessed there. And, you hope high profile players like Ryan Getzlaf being a big one there in terms of like the guy who's still there to this day and has been there the entire time. Like you'd be interested to hear what those guys say. And if they'll, step up and say yeah, it got really bad. We, and hopefully they step up and try and take the lead on this was a very good thing and that this was needed to change and that this change needed to happen.
Because I mean, you don't always want to put it on the on the backs of the players. Like I do always want to put it on the backs of the owners, right? Because they are the ones who truly hold power. They are billionaires versus millionaires. They're vastly more influential. But you take a guy like Jonathan Toews came out of the Blackhawks scandal looking awful, looking pathetic, because you're there and you're letting it happen and you're wearing that C on your chest, like it means anything. And I don't want to speak too much about this because we don't know details, but Ryan Getzlaf has been the captain in Anaheim for so much of Bob Murray's tenure. And if you are letting, the verbal abuse happen in your capacity as captain, that's got to be seen as a dereliction of duty. You're letting your teammates down. I remember some of the stuff that makes me most livid reading about the Mike Keenan era in Canucks history is all these stories of him being incredibly verbally abusive to players in the dressing room, including like Trevor Linden. I mean, how could you? And people not, Mark Messier just sitting there the whole time, just letting it happen and then going for private little meetings with Keenan afterwards. Like, it's just insane. It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, because not to you don't want to speculate too much on it. I imagine, considering how far reaching this is, I wouldn't be surprised if Getzlaf was one of the players who experienced this himself. Like you don't go, because you don't reach this kind of level with where it doesn't seem like when it comes to this sort of thing, it's a case of somebody, there was the favorites. It just kind of seems like everybody got impacted here, which is where you get the power from. It's the idea of everybody is beneath you. So but it'll be interesting to see how much we get out of that in the coming days.
One thing I wanted to add is we talked a little bit off camera about our mutual imposter syndrome that we suffer as content creators. And it's important to remember, hockey players are human beings too. We might be aware that, an NHL player is one of the best players in the world, but they're not aware of that all the time, right? They're human beings too. They have insecurities. They are, when they get told things like, oh, if you speak out about this, you're one step away from the minors or whatever. Any of us would believe that to a degree. Cause I mean, if I were playing in the NHL, I'm quite positive that I would spend much of my time being like, oh, this is about to be taken away from me. Right. Yeah. They're human beings. They don't have as much power as we tell ourselves they do.
Yeah, they are superheroes in a way. They're superheroes to us, to the general public, but behind the scenes, it's much more different than that. Like it's a very different sort of situation. It's almost, so you hope that they're going to get that the players who've been hurt by like stuff like this are going to get their due here, and they're going to get their moment to help make it better and to start healing from that stuff. Yeah. Two less serious things to kind of touch on before we get out of here for this show. Columbus is retiring Rick Nash's number 61 jersey. That was announced today. I will ask you the Canucks are obviously a team that have retired quite a few jerseys in their history as a team that have not won any championships per se. And I know people, there are lots of people who get a little bit like, you shouldn't retire jerseys without any sort of like success or championships involved. I don't know where you stand on this in particular, but I'm excited. I think it's about time for Rick Nash to get his day with the Jackets again for what he did with that franchise.
I mean, of course, like it's not always about like your contributions on a league-wide scale. It's he brought that franchise into the NHL. Like he gave the fans the first thing in the franchise to be excited about. I actually didn't know his number is being retired. So thanks. That's the second piece of breaking news you've dropped on me mid podcast. So congrats.
I might drop one more in here too.
Ooh, okay. You got your finger on the pulse. I think so. I'm not upset with the level of jersey numbers that the Canucks have retired. I think one per decade is fairly appropriate, and I think you can look at all of them and justify them. I think there are teams that have done like a maybe worse job of overdoing it a little bit, but I don't think you can argue with any of the names that are up there. I think it's good for now. That being said, like I know Luongo is maybe next on the list, but
he better be. If you like literally, there is a banner sitting right in the corner there. That is literally as I say all the time, it's the one hill I will absolutely die on. It is that Roberto Luongo deserves to have his jersey retired, and anyone who disagrees is completely wrong.
Well, I don't want the whole episode to get scrubbed, so I guess I'll shut up.
How dare you, sir?
I'm a fence sitter. I don't necessarily think he shouldn't be up there, but I imagine my view on him will soften once the recapture penalty is off.
Yeah.
No, once the recapture penalty is
like that's not his fault. Like
isn't it?
It's not his job to say no to the money. It's the team's job to either not offer it or know what they're getting themselves into. And also in the recapture penalty, I will say that the NHL has been very comfortable getting rid of that recapture penalty for literally everyone else except the Canucks. So it's kind of bullcrap that they even have to pay it at all.
Okay. Well, we got to back up here. Okay, full disclosure. I agree. The recapture penalty is bullcrap. I don't begrudge Luongo for signing the contract. I'm a strong union person. Get the bag, secure the money. That is fine.
Secure the bag. Yeah.
But couldn't he have just stayed on LTIR instead of retiring?
Well, no, because Florida it doesn't have the money the Canucks do, and they need every penny. So they needed him to retire so they could, like, I get where that idea comes from. Like, I get the why that could have worked. Like, if he were still in Vancouver, yes, he could have done that. I think absolutely they would have gone that route. I think it's just that because he happens to be on the Panthers, a team that literally needs every dollar they can to stay from moving to Quebec. I think that's why he retired, because he did them the solid of being able to do that, and that's why he's like working in front office now, and that's why he's doing all those things for him.
Totally fair. That's a totally fair point. Then I'll leave you with this. It's very clear where his loyalties lie. He's made his choice, and I just think the Canucks should remember that when they consider the banner.
He took out a ad in the province. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to. He could have totally not said anything about the Canucks, and he took out a damn province ad. The man is a god, and I love him. Oh God!
And Jack Eichel had a pretty nice Buffalo tribute video too. I'm just saying.
Yeah, well, and like good for him, and he didn't have to do that because of how badly the Sabres treated him. That was another. That's a great that's a great example of in my opinion, of why Luongo got treated by garbage by the Canucks management. But he's still doing like things for the fans because he's just that good, because he's just that great a guy. And I mean, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. He's gonna get his jersey retired by the Canucks, and he's gonna do so as the next GM of the Canucks. So that's what we all have to look forward to here. It's gonna be the Sedins and Luongo and Lawrence Gilman running the team in like a couple years. That's what I hope for anyway. That's what I've talked about before. The Luongo Gilman ticket is where I see the next management team lying at some point.
I do have a friend who's a lawyer who did some work with Gilman and says he's like the smartest person he's ever met. So I'm fully on board with that. Yeah. Sorry, it got so heated there. We were on such an agreeable track. And I've burned all my bridges here.
Yeah, I've already added you to the banned list as we speak. No, and then other thing quickly, Greg Wyshynski put out an article today saying the NHL wants to put a couple of the skills competitions out on the Strip in Las Vegas, like because the All-Star game is in Vegas this year, right before the Olympics, and they want to do some events outside, like literally closing down the street of the Las Vegas Strip to do them. And God, that would be cool. That would be very fun. That's the kind of out of the box thinking the NHL's lacked for years when it comes to their event planning. I would love to see that.
Totally. I'm in full support of making the All-Star game as weird as possible. That's what it's all about for me. Like I find it very hard to care about the All-Star game. And so the weirder it gets, the better for me. Like all that stuff where they were like shooting pucks from the top of the arena
and golf.
Yeah, and the one where they had to get it through those pillars, like it was like a God of War puzzle. That was like, I was like, hey, it kind of didn't work out well, but whatever. I watched it.
Yeah, it didn't work out, and that was because I would say largely just that's due to the first time bug. The problem with the NHL often is that they try something once, and when it's not an immediate hit, they're like, okay, scrap it forever. Let's never come back to this. They need to really hammer home of, okay, there's going to be some trial and error. It's not going to work immediately. We just got to keep plugging away with it and keep trying it and keep working and making it better. Hopefully they find something like that here.
Well, stuff like I don't know, it's so boring sometimes. Like the idea of you're going to do the fastest skater competition, but it's not a race. It's one guy going in a circle. Like it's like if NASCAR just had the cars go one at a time, and then we're like, you were fastest. It's not great television.
That's where I think this could come in. You could see them like skating down the strip, maybe it's like something like that, where it's them like skating down or it's like more like I don't know if you've ever seen like the Red Bull crashed ice competition. Where it's like it's literally them racing, like knocking each other through and like trying to skate through. Like there's injury concerns, of course, but like you could maybe make it a little bit more competitive. There could be some more actual like competition going there.
Yeah, give them some lanes. Just have the 10 fastest skaters on the blocks, and one end to the other go. Like it would be
go. That'd be must-see TV. Like that'd be great.
It would be embarrassing. They might be worried about how embarrassing it is, how far ahead McDavid is of every other player.
That's very true.
That might be their only concern.
Maybe like McDavid just has to be held. Maybe it has to be like McDavid watches the first race, and then whoever wins out of that heat or whatever is who he gets to face, or like a be all take all.
Yeah,
like the belt.
You would almost have to split screen it because he's so far ahead of everyone else that like the camera cannot capture him at the same time. That's what I'm picturing. Yeah,
that's exactly what I'm picturing too. And the last question before we get out of here for this show, I wanted to ask you. This was a debate that came up yesterday during the last couple of days, really. Thanks to, of course, Thomas Durantz, who's been the pun king of late. He also is the king of the take when it comes to time zones in sports. And so I wanted to ask you the question: where is it better to be on the Pacific time zone for watching sports, or the Eastern time zone for watching sports? Each have their advantages, each have their pros and cons. Which one is better in your mind?
Okay, all due respect to Thomas Drance, who is the best, period.
Yes.
It's pretty obvious that he may not have a ton of early mornings in his life. Speaking of someone who does have a lot of early mornings in their life, a game ending at 12:30 is a non-starter for me. Like that just cannot happen. So Pacific all the way, obviously. My one caveat is, if I could pick a like totally other time zone, some of my favorite hockey experiences have been like during the Olympics or World Cup or something like that, when the games are happening at like midnight or 3 a.m. Like I remember one where it was Slovakia versus Slovenia game, I think, at midnight, and then Russia versus USA, and then Canada versus Sweden at 6 a.m. And I stayed up and watched them all, and it was like my favorite hockey. Yeah, that US Russia game was like one of the best hockey games I've ever seen, and I'm like, is this the best hockey I've ever seen? Or is it because it's 4 a.m. and my brain is like
turned to mush? Yeah,
yeah, like totally gone at this point. But oh yeah, that to me is the best time zone, is when it's in the middle of your night.
Yeah, when the Olympics are on in the middle of the night, like that is very fun. Like there is something fun, but in a way that's because I would say like you're right, because it's the fact of it's the novelty of it. It's the idea that we're gonna get up at we are making a scheduled time to get up at 4 a.m., which we normally wouldn't do because there's an important game on, right? So it works out really well. I firmly agree with you that the Pacific is better. And you are, and I don't know Drance like super well. I don't know what his life is like. I know he has a dog now, so maybe that changes how he lives his life a little bit. But like, I went to one morning skate last week, and that morning skate didn't start till like 10:30 or 11:30. Yeah. So like, you don't have to get up as early. It's like, I'm sorry. I'm 24, like, which is, I guess for most people would consider like peak party age, but I get like party era or like time, whatever. But I get tired past like midnight. Like I can't stay up much longer past like 1 a.m. like 1 a.m. I stay up for sometimes. But even then, that's just to do work. That's not to like actually like go out and like actively be paying attention to sports. Like I don't have the time. My brain is not in that capacity at that point anymore. I am going to I very much like getting home from work or school or what have you at like around 4 or 5, having hockey on right there when you get there, having it on until like 10:30, and then going to bed at a reasonable time. That sounds like a much better setup in my opinion. You
are wise beyond your years. And it's only going to get harder from here. Speaking to someone 8 years older than you, so just to warn you, it gets harder to stay up late.
Oh God, and I can already feel myself just not being able to wake up having a hard time waking up at 7. Stephan, thank you so much for coming on this show and being my guest co-host today. It's been an absolute pleasure. For the people that have not heard of you, where can they find you and your work these days?
You can find my hockey work exclusively at CanucksArmy, where we've recently added the spectacular Lachlan Irvine. So things are looking up for CanucksArmy right now. We're adding lots of talented people to the roster. And if you want any non-hockey stuff that is not exclusively, but primarily Marvel Comics and Marvel Cinematic Universe related, you can find me over at Ranker. And I'm on Twitter if you want to follow me. I'm not the best follow in the world, so only if you're really looking for more to follow. Don't make me in your top like 100.
I would disagree. I'd put you in my top 100 easily.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, there you go. I would, and you know what? I'll definitely have to have you on again at some point to talk just exclusively about Marvel. That might be an off the post thing we have to do at some point, where I just bring you on to talk about like Shang-Chi, Eternals, of course, Spider-Man. Far From Home is coming out, or No Way Home, sorry, is coming out pretty soon. Lots of good Marvel content these days that worth talking about. And as for myself, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Lock in the Crease. You can find my writing exclusively at CanucksArmy.com these days. And you can find some other stuff that we do, like Off the Post on the CreaseCast Patreon for $5 a month. You get bonus episodes, you get updates on stuff that we're working on for the show. There's merch available at teespring.com/CreaseCast for you to go check out as well. And if Cody were here, he would tell you to go follow him at Cody Sievertson on Twitter. He'd tell you to go follow his website, ahlnucksharvest.com, where he's posted a bunch of Abbotsford Canucks content following the farm team for you to go check out. And he will be back on our Monday show. Until then, enjoy the games this week. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Bye, everybody.